Hi guys, Maurice Chevalier here again. Just wanted to give a quick tutorial on Ultrabeat. It's the main electronic drum system in Logic Pro X. A lot of us have a lot of external purchased drum systems. I have a bunch, as well as sample libraries that are loaded in the Contact EX24. But I want to take a few minutes and go over Ultrabeat, which is underutilized and misunderstood, and show you some of the excellent features and some of those lesser known capabilities in Ultrabeat. I want to get right to it, so let's stop this rhythm, which is a sequence. I'm going to mute, and we're going to play with some of the features in Ultrabeat. All right, so here you have something called voice select, which basically just switches when I hit a note on the keyboard, and it'll select that sound. All right. Next, you have import, which is one of my favorite features. It allows you to import other Ultrabeat kits and ESX24, so I can go in and open this, but it's not actually going to open. It'll actually let me drag something to and as you can see when I hit it, but you can import samples from anywhere else in ESX24 library or in Ultrabeat library and have a lot of fun making beats that way. All right, so also on top is a MIDI controller assignment, regular CC, and after touch and pitch wheel, I have, the obvious stuff, pitch bend, expression. I have an expression pedal and also a breath controller, so I'll use that for stuff. After touch as well. At any rate, so along the side you have the main level for Ultrabeat, which I'll use now. Turn this back on. So this is the main level for Ultrabeat. And you also have the levels for each of the internal samples, or not just samples. Ultrabeat is capable of traditional sample playback, as you can see here. So a sample loaded into this slot for a snare, but each slot is actually a synthesizer slot. So you can do real high-end synthesis in each of these slots. But yeah, it can load samples, it can load WAV files, SD2 files, AIFF files, Ultrabeat's own platform, as well as CAF files, core audio format. That's Apple's library, its own format for storing multi-channel audio. In Logic, it's used for things like playing back surround sound samples or audio on a single track. But in Ultrabeat, it can be used to play back samples that have different triggers at different velocities, different samples at different velocities. I'm not going to go deep into that here. Most of us will never use it. I'm going to get into the basic features. So as I said, these are the levels. You have mutes and solos for every sample, for every slot, I should say. This top slot is special, by the way, because it extends beyond its note value. Its note value is C4 or C3, depending on which keyboard you're using, but it extends beyond that all the way up the keyboard. The others start from C1, as you can see here in Logic, and to B2, and they're triggering each of those slots. So you have pan, and then you have sub-outs. The sub-outs are the 25 slots that you can use to separate your drum samples or drum slots into different channels on the Logic mixer, so you can do a proper mix if you choose. The main out, of course, is outs 1 and 2, and then you see the next 7 slots are stereo, and then you have another 8 slots that are mono. These are not used currently in Logic. I think they put those there with the intent to extend the capability of this device at some point. But at any rate, you'll note that beside the mute button, you see this little SQ button. That's related to the sequencer, and we'll get into that a bit later. All right, so down at the bottom is the sequencer, and we'll go over that in depth shortly, but the basics are the velocity and gating for every note that it hit. So this bass drum that is being hit at different velocities here, and this longer hit here, that's literally how long it's going to be held. You can actually extend notes across different points, but you can have up to 32 hits in a single pattern, and that's noted here. And I can change it, as you see there. Once it's showing, I can drag. You can do other things with patterns we'll get into when we talk about the sequencer. All right, so inside this main synthesizer window, you're looking at here the basic sound generation is in red here, in dark red. This is where the sound is generated. To the right is modulation, and here's the main output for that one sound. So basically, the sound is generated here. The level for the generators are here. The filtering and distortion is here. And then it goes through an EQ, panning, spreading, and then the final level here, which leads to the faders here. These are faders, as you see, the pans, etc. And the notes can be triggered by clicking as well as using a keyboard. All right, so I'm going to find a blank slot to start with and go through some of the generators really quick. The generator most will be using is oscillator 2 because it allows you to play back a sample. But I'm going to start with oscillator 1. Oscillator 1 has 3 different generator types. The first is a phase oscillator, and basically, at its simplest, it's basically creating a sine wave, as you can hear there. If you saturate it, kind of like a gentle musical kind of distortion, you can change it to a square. But at its simplest, it's this very simple sine wave. You can change the slope and create a more triangular. And then if you change the symmetry, or asymmetry in this case, you can create kind of saw wave-ish patterns, etc. So you can see that. All right, so you can literally make synthesizer kind of sounds with this, but in Ultrabeat you want to make a drum. So I'm going to keep my communications about this device related to the drums. All right, so that's phase oscillator. Then you have FM, and once again you got this sine wave kind of sound being generated, but you won't be able to hear any change unless you activate oscillator 1. Even if you can't hear it, which I'm going to turn oscillator 1 all the way down so it cannot be heard even by itself. Okay, let's turn it down. But now oscillator 1, as you can see here, oscillator 2 to oscillator 1, so they're going to be modulating each other. So now you're getting some really strange. And if I turn this off, change this back to a sine wave, and that you can't hear. So you have to, FM implies that you're modulating one oscillator against another, basically. So you can get some really weird sounds that way. I'll come back and talking about the modulation here, which allows you to really mangle the sounds even further. But this is the basics of the FM generator. All right, so the third generator type for oscillator 1 is sidechain. That literally means you can select an input from your Logic project and either a bus, audio track, or live input for something you're doing live, like even my voice, and send it into Ultrabeat and affect it within Ultrabeat, use the filters, etc. within Ultrabeat. All right, so in this case, I have Keyscape playing into Ultrabeat sidechain here, and then you hear nothing because I have to create some sequence points on the sequencer or hit some keys on that. But anyway, the sequencer works better. But basically, it's only allowing through what I tell it to with this sequence and this envelope, which I'm using to trigger. We'll get back to modulators later. All right, on to the next generator point, which is oscillator 2. Oscillator 2 has another phase oscillator, so I won't spend a lot of time on that, though there is a difference between the two phase oscillators. Oscillator 1's phase oscillator has saturation and asymmetry. Oscillator 2's phase oscillator generator has saturation and asymmetry. They both have slope, which can be used to change the sharpness of the waveform, and asymmetry, as we've seen here, and saturation, which can change a sine wave into a square wave. All right, but the modulation sources for the two are not the same. The saturation on oscillator 2 is being modulated by any of your choices, which I should go over now. And the asymmetry of oscillator 1's phase oscillator can be modulated. So you have traditional modulators here. LFO, which there are 2. The envelopes, which there are 4. And max. Max is special because it takes whatever is listed in this via slot and just does exactly all the way. So you could have an envelope, which I'm using here to let's take that down a notch. So this oscillator, phase oscillator, is being triggered via envelope now. So I can round that out and actually just make that a single. The sustain button allows you to choose in the envelope where the sustain happens. That's all it does. All right, so right now this is being modulated by this envelope. Well, it's not until I do this, actually. All right, good. So as you can see, it changes over time. Let me turn this modulator off. So it's doing this, it's doing that, but a lot smoother than I can. So, right, got it. All right. So saturation on this one cannot be modulated here, but this can. Oops, sorry. Change it to LFO1. Turn up the modulator. Oops. And now you've got that. All right. So that's how the modulation system works, basically. Well, now you know that. And you can modulate stuff all over this device. You have to experiment with it. It's so important. All right, next oscillator, oscillator 2, has a phase oscillator which can modulate the saturation point. All right, so let's turn it down and then play it and turn it up so we can hear it. And now we're hearing it this LFO modulate that saturation. So we can choose the starting point with this red slider. The blue slider affects how much this is being saturated from that starting point. Got it? Cool. Moving on to sample. This is the simplest and most useful, most likely to be used by you and me. We just load a sample. Let's pick something. Let's pick kick. Something really simple. Turn it up. And it's a cake. Nothing, no surprise there. You can reverse it. You can change the start point. There are 2 start points, by the way. If you hit it soft, it starts with that minimum one. Let's change it this way so you can really see. So it's a much shorter play because it's starting from there. And if I hit it hard, it's going to start way back here. By the way, you're also hearing me hit the keys, so let me do this. And next, we'll reverse that back and put this here, put that there. Now hard and soft. You only hearing it from there. Get it? Most of the time it'll stay here because whether you're playing soft or hard, you want to hear that whole sample. All right, so let's talk about the paths. Oh yeah, I got to talk about this noise generator, which is a really cool device. So that doesn't seem very useful, but it is. It is because, so I turn all these modulators off. It is very useful because it allows you to create some sounds that are easily drum worthy. As you can see right now, I'm using this oscillator to change it from this never ending thing as long as I hold the key to this. The gate, by the way, makes it stop as soon as you let go of the key. Single without the gate makes it continue until the end of this envelope, and multi means that you can have multiple hits which will overlap up to the end of the pilot active voices point, which is 50. So I could hit up to 50 of those cymbal-like hits, and they would all play unless I got over 50 hits across the entire drum machine playing at once. Oh, and the group function here is so that if I'm playing a hi-hat, which is here, I got the solo, a hi-hat here, and an open hi-hat here, I can put them in the same group. Turn that back on. I put them in the same group, the hi-hat and the open hi-hat. So when I hit the open hi-hat and then hit the closed hi-hat right after it, it'll immediately end the triggering of that sample. Back to our new sample, which is just noise. And you can completely change what you're hearing. Let's turn it up. So it's really cool because you can really make some cool drums out of that. So let's just solo it and play this sequence. See how long? And you can really see how long the different gated hits matter because this held it out. It's pretty cool. All right, moving on. I've shown you the two. I'm sorry, I showed you the oscillators, but I didn't show you this last oscillator generator, which is model on oscillator 2. It's only on oscillator 2, and the way it works is it's basically like the sculpture instrument in Logic. There are two exciter types, which basically tell you how this note is being hit or strummed. All right, so you got this hit, and you can hear the difference. Bell-like. And the best thing to do is to learn how it works. You can affect the pitch, starting point here, and then you can change offset that by 50 cents either way. So we're gonna make some kind of gongish bass drummy. You can turn on some noise. Change that by adding some dirt. then mix them together. And all right, so these two terrible sounds I just created are being generated by the oscillators here and by this noise generator. And then they're all sent to their level knobs, which can also be modulated. Forgive me if I'm talking funny. There's a bit of delay on my system. Latency. All right, so these knobs affect the level of each individual oscillator and noise generator, and then you can choose after that what happens next to the sound. So your sound is generated, it follows through this path, through the level knob to this point, and level knob to this point. So all three generators end up passing through this filter. Now you can skip the filter for each device, for each oscillator and noise generator. It's your choice. If they're turned on, I should say. Oh, I left out one generator, and that's this guy. Now the ring modulator is oscillator 2 being modulated by oscillator 1. You can only hear it if they're both on. You can hear that. Let's turn these down so you can hear what is actually being created by the modulation of these two. So they affect each other. But you're not actually hearing these two. You're hearing this ring mod. So if I turn it off, you're hearing nothing. Turn these up and turn this one up. And then that's all three together. Right, so that's ring modulation. Not a lot of controls there. So you have 4 different sound generators. Oscillator 1, the noise generator, oscillator 2, and the ring modulator. All end up in this filter section. All right, so let's pick a sample, something we understand. Put that at a point that makes sense. Good enough. And now that ends up passing into the filter. That's the filter. So you have low pass, high pass, band pass. Band pass filters basically put a upward facing cue so that the point you're choosing, there's no real note on the frequency, but so you have to use your ear. But it puts a point where that's being accentuated, especially when you use resonance. All right? And then this is how big or how harsh the slope is. So this makes it pretty harsh. Just use your ear and choose what you like. Band rejection does the opposite. It makes a notch. So it's whatever you choose is being rejected, and the frequencies around it are being enhanced. Not bad for a bass drum. All right, turn the filter off, but you also have 2 different types of distortion. Crush, which is a bit crusher, obvious, and color it. Great for trance and other kinds of music like that. And a normal distortion. You can see the effect is pretty dramatic depending on the color and the level. This is great for pretty much every kind of music. I mean, who doesn't like that? That's hot. All right, I should note that envelope 4 is locked to this main level knob. If I didn't mention it, all the level for all the generators passes through this filter and then passes through this EQ, to the pan, and then through this final level, which is locked to envelope generator 4. Got it? All right. So you've got the basics. You've already gotten the basics, and it's probably been too long already. The filters are pretty straightforward. Most people use low-pass filters. I suggest you try everything. You never know what's going to make you happy. You can change the direction of implementation of this filter and distortion, so you can have the distortion first if you want by clicking here. So no matter where you're coming from, now this distortion is before the filter. All right, this way the filter is before the distortion, and you can hear that because I'm taking out all the high end using this low pass filter, and then adding some back by adding harmonics. So yeah, so now it's being distorted after the filter, and now it's the reverse. All right, so that's the basics of Ultrabeat. I just want to talk about the EQ. I mean, it's an EQ. If you use Logic, then you know how it works. You know, it's not that complicated. The frequency, the Q, and you have two bands here. Frequency here, and the Q. Right? Nothing crazy. So you have envelopes that can be used to modulate pretty much anything except LFOs. You have LFOs that can be used to modulate. So you see they're blue. That's for a reason, because you see the blue modulation points all over the device. All right? So you can choose envelopes. These green points are vias, and they're very specific. These are things that will be affected by things you're doing actively while recording. So these A, B, C, and D modulators are actually the MIDI modulators that you choose here. And velocity is just velocity. It's how hard you hit. So that's either you playing live or the velocity coming from this section of the sequencer. So we can move on to the sequencer now, which is pretty cool. Most of the time for me, I sequence by tapping in rhythms. And you can see that it's playing each hit live. So that's the bass drum track. So I'm not using the sequencer when using it this way. The sequencer here can be viewed in two ways. This view you're looking at now here is for this bass drum, which is selected, and it's a very detailed view of each hit. So I'm going to let it play. I actually like that distortion. And let's add some Q. So you can do a lot of mixing, depending on what you want, of course. I love clicking the bass drums just because it makes them pop out of the mix. I think you can grab inside the window too. Yeah. That's big. Probably not great for you guys, but I love it. All right. So obviously that means you could layer sounds together and have them play the same sequence or similar sequences. But how do you do that easily? Well, that's full view. The full view of the sequences shows you what you hit. So I can add a hit here, which is going to play over that snare and clap. See? All right, so you can, wherever you choose to place a marker here, it's going to affect the sequence for that particular device, and they're all in line. So that's pretty straightforward. But to get into detail, you have to turn off the full view so you can create, this is the clap track. So you can create, you know, velocities that are at different heights, which means they're being hit less hard. And I hate that pattern. Let's see if we can get this. Something that sounds kind of cool. No, we can't apparently. That's better. All right. So that's the basic of the sequencer. I mean, it's literally that simple. You can choose how long the sequences play, the patterns play. You can choose the height of velocity based on the tap-ins. These are your tap points for each slot, each sample or sound. And there's another wonderful spot called step mode. Voice mode basically is when each voice is actually triggered. Step mode is automation. So all the things you see on screen right now can be automated for this voice. Amazing. So you can literally, just for this one hit, you see where it's hitting here, you can have any of these parameters change for that hit. So let's choose, let's see, what do we got here? The cymbal. Let's add a couple of cymbal hits. Oops, sorry. Yeah. And then I want to change how they sound for each of these hits. All right. So I'm going to let them play first. That kind of stinks, but. All right. You can see that it's going through the sequence, and when it reaches each node, it's going to play that because there's a marker here, a velocity marker. So we're going to click this step mode, and underneath each one of those, we can do something to anything we choose at any point here that we select, and it will change something, including the pitch of this. Oh, actually, the sample. Yeah, there you go. You can really hear that. All right. So you can see that. You can see how much a difference that makes. All right. And let's do this. Wow. Right. So you can see how far you can take that. So you can automate any of these by just dragging around buttons on screen, clicking a point here and dragging around buttons on screen. Now, the full view does not show these step parameters for automation. This is only showing what's being struck on the voices, okay? And if I didn't note it, these SQ markers here denote that this sound is being sequenced. Right, and I've ruined this sequence. But, and that's another interesting part of this sequencer is pattern mode. Pattern mode allows you to trigger the patterns by hitting a key on your keyboard. So you can turn on pattern mode, and then if I hit that note, B0, right now, it's going to trigger that sequence, sorry, depending on how I have this set. A one-shot trigger is going to play the entire pattern one time and stop. Right? Sustain will usually play it as long as I hold it. Right? Toggle is just going to stay on as long as the song is playing. Actually, it's staying on no matter what it looks like. All right. And you can turn it back off by hitting the note again. So toggle is on or off by whether you hit the note. Toggle on step 1 will only change or re-trigger that pattern on the next beat measure. So right there and right there, etc., etc., etc. All right, a couple more things to do with the sequencer, and then we'll be done with the basics of Ultrabeat. Voice mute mode. This is a very special mode. It's very cool. All right, so if I hit a bunch of keys here, you can see that I'm hitting the notes. Now let's stop the sequencer. And I'm hitting F sharp here, and it's muting that based. I wish there was a solo as well, but it's muting them based on whether or not I hit a key. So I'm literally muting the drums based on hitting a key. So if I press play in the sequence, pretty cool stuff. All right, one last thing about the sequencer is these patterns, there's 24 available at once. You can copy and paste by control clicking, I guess. Yeah, or right clicking. And so I'm going to clear this one. And last I want to cover is dragging patterns. So if I got a pattern here that I created, it's basically the same pattern with an alternate. You can drag it right into Logic. And that other pattern we were just playing with, just drag it right into Logic. So now you can edit it as regular MIDI, right? And you can use this collapse mode. There it is. And just see the hits that you played and edit them to death. So that's it. I hope you come back and check out my other videos. I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope you subscribe and comment, ask questions. I love this stuff. So I'll be here. I'll talk to you soon.